So I want to ask you a question. Have you ever, like, listened to a massive, just stadium-shaking pop anthem,
Oh, absolutely.
right? And you're standing there, or you're picturing it, and there are 70,000 people screaming. The bass is vibrating right through the concrete. The lights are completely blinding.
Yeah, everyone is just belting out the lyrics.
Exactly, with this absolute desperate conviction. And, well, have you ever felt deep down that the song you're screaming is actually a complex philosophical thesis in disguise?
I mean, on the surface, that sounds like a massive contradiction.
It really does.
It-
Because we are completely conditioned to put those two things in, totally different universes. Stadiums are for raw feeling, right?
Right, and libraries are for rigorous thinking.
Exactly. You picture an introverted philosopher hunched over a wooden desk in a quiet 1940s Parisian cafe, writing dense academic theory. You do not picture them at a pop concert.
No, you really don't.
But what if that screaming crowd is actually engaging in high-level French existentialism,
Yeah.
and they don't even know it?
That is the exact collision we're looking at today.
Yeah, today we are smashing those two worlds together for this deep dive. And honestly, the resulting collision changes how you view both pop culture and philosophy.
It really is a profound collision, and we are working from an incredibly unique source text today.
Oh, it's so unique.
Right. It's a book that explicitly admits it probably shouldn't even exist. It's titled Dear John de Beauvoir Meets Taylor Swift.
Which is just a wild title.
It is. It belongs to this larger series called the Philo Swift Collection, and the author is operating under this pseudonym, which is Hoot S.
And that translates from Taiwanese Mandarin to mouse-colored cat. Right.
Exactly, mouse-colored cat. And there is just endless speculation about who this author actually is.
I've seen so many theories online.
Oh, yeah. Some theories suggest it's a former programmer who pivoted to law. Others propose it's some, nomadic philosopher quietly synthesizing ideas between Brussels, Antwerp, and Krakow.
Which sounds so romantic.
It does, but the author actually casually dismissed that last theory as a, quote, geographical misunderstanding,
Ah, that's so good.
which really gives you a sense of their playful intellect.
I love that deflection so much. But whether they are in Brussels or Taipei, the mission of their text is what really hooked me.
It's a very specific mission.
Yeah, because they aren't trying to just give us a biography of a pop star.
Yeah.
And they definitely aren't giving a dry, boring lecture on 20th century feminism.
Right. The goal is to seat this global pop icon and a foundational feminist philosopher, Simone de Beauvoir, at the exact same table.
To see what happens.
Exactly. We are going to use a 3.5-minute pop song to basically translate complex historical philosophy.
And then on the flip side, we're using that rigorous philosophy to validate the intense, often mocked emotions of you.
Which is brilliant. And the author knows perfectly well that this pairing is going to ruffle some feathers.
Oh, for sure.
The preface actually directly addresses the smirk. You know the smirk I'm talking about.
Oh, I know the smirk. It's the reaction serious people have when you mention a modern pop star in the same breath as a canonical thinker.
Exactly. The author argues that for these serious people, just the pairing alone is already one too many.
Like it's offensive to them.
Yeah, but rather than getting defensive about it, the author turns it around and asks a far more interesting question, which is, why does that idea make us smirk in the first place?
Right. What is the actual mechanism behind our dismissal?
And that's where the author brings in the sociologist Pierre Bourdieu.
Yes. Okay, let's get into Bourdieu. Because the text argues that the smirk isn't actually about intellectual depth at all, is it?
No, not at all. It's about social sorting.
Okay, let me see if I am tracking this properly because it's fascinating.
Mhm.
We tend to think that a dense opera or like a classic novel is inherently better or deeper than a top 40 radio hit.
That's the assumption, yeah.
But Bourdieu's work, specifically his landmark book Distinction, suggests something else. He says we categorize things as mere entertainment versus high art, mostly as a way to rank ourselves in a social hierarchy.
That is the core of Bourdieu's theory right there. He introduced this concept of cultural capital.
Cultural capital. So not like money.
Right. We all understand economic capital, having money in the bank, but cultural capital is having the right tastes, the right education, the right conversational references at a dinner party.
Oh, like knowing which wine to order or dropping a reference to an obscure indie film.
Exactly. Bourdieu argued that society uses culture to draw these invisible lines between classes.
So gatekeeping.
It is absolute gatekeeping. When
Yeah.
the intellectual elite dismiss a pop song as shallow, they are not necessarily performing a rigorous musical or lyrical analysis of the track.
They're just rejecting it on principle.
Yeah, they're performing a boundary maintenance exercise. They are signaling to their peers, hey, I belong to the group that understands complex esoteric things, and I do not belong to the masses.
That is so wild. I'm trying to picture how this actually plays out in the real world.
Well, how do you see it?
It reminds me of the difference between, like, an exclusive country club and a massive public park.
Okay, I like this. Keep going.
So, if you go to a country club, the grass isn't necessarily mathematically superior to the grass in the public park, right?
Right, or grass is grass.
Yeah. The entire value of the country club comes from the barrier to entry. It comes entirely from who is not allowed inside.
Exactly. The velvet rope is the point.
Yes. You need money, you need a sponsor, you need to wear the right shoes. Whereas the public park, anyone could just walk in. The beauty's there for everybody.
That analogy maps perfectly onto Bourdieu's framework. High culture circulates using what we can call credentials,
Credentials. Okay.
and low culture, or pop culture, circulates with playlists.
Oh, I love that distinction. Credentials versus playlists.
Think about what it takes to acquire a credential, to fully appreciate, say, a highly abstract piece of contemporary art or an untranslated 18th century philosophical text.
You'd need a lot.
You need time, you need money, and you almost certainly need a specific institutional background, like a university education that gave you the vocabulary to even decode the work.
Right, because the artwork is intentionally opaque.
Exactly. Its opacity is its value, because only a select few hold the key to understand it.
But a playlist just requires an internet connection and a pair of cheap headphones.
That's all it takes. And that extreme accessibility is actually perceived as a threat by the elite.
Wait, a threat? Really?
Yes, because if everyone understands a piece of art, if it resonates with 70 million people simultaneously across different countries and class divides, it loses its utility as a status signal.
Oh, I see. You can't use it to brag.
Right. You cannot use a universally beloved pop song to prove you are more refined than your neighbor.
Because your neighbor's already listening to it.
Exactly. Therefore, the intellectual elite must deem pop culture suspect purely because it is accessible.
Because it democratizes the experience.
The author of our text puts it brilliantly. They point out that the pop star is fundamentally asking the exact same questions that preoccupied Rousseau, Hannah Arendt, Nietzsche, and Wittgenstein.
Really. The same question.
Yes. Questions about identity, the unreliability of memory, the mechanics of power, the illusion of love, and the terrifying nature of freedom.
Wow. Okay, when you list them like that, it sounds like a syllabus.
Right. The difference is not the depth of the inquiry. The difference is permission.
Permission from who?
From the academic establishment. She is asking these massive philosophical questions in 3.5 minutes in front of a stadium of screaming teenagers without asking anyone's permission.
That is so powerful.
She democratizes the risk of philosophical inquiry rather than hoarding its prestige.
To democratize risk rather than hoarding prestige. That is such a sharp way to phrase it.
It really gets to the core of it.
Because, think about it, when a philosopher writes a treatise on heartbreak, it's shielded by academic jargon. If they get it wrong, only 50 other academics will ever know.
Very true. The stakes are low in terms of public humiliation.
But when a songwriter releases a track about heartbreak, millions of people instantly judge its authenticity.
They are completely exposed.
But, okay, if we accept the society artificially dismisses this kind of accessible art as lesser, and specifically dismisses it because it is heavily associated with young women and teenage girls, what does that dismissal actually feel like for the creator?
That is the big question. How does that environment shape them?
Yeah. How does it feel to be on the receiving end of that smirk?
The text actually attempts to answer that through a really fascinating literary device.
Oh, the foreword.
Yes, it contains an apocryphal foreword titled Taylor's Way.
Apocryphal meaning it's not actually written by her.
Correct. The author makes it explicitly clear that this was not written by the pop star herself. It is an imagined foreword written by the mouse-colored cat author, but adopting the perspective of the songwriter at 2 a.m.
Setting the scene.
Right. She's sitting somewhere between the deafening noise of public life and the absolute silence of a solitary room. It is designed to voice the internalized experience of that societal dismissal.
It paints a surprisingly vivid, almost claustrophobic picture.
It really does. What stood out to you?
Well, the voice talks about spending half her life trying to capture lightning in a bottle. constantly scribbling secrets in spiral notebooks, sitting on the floor in pajamas trying to make sense of a chaotic world.
Which is such a universal teenage feeling.
But no matter how precise the songwriting gets, it hits this massive wall of societal reception. The voice details the experience of being told for years that her feelings were simply too much.
Ah, too much.
Yeah, they were too loud, too frequent, and heavily implied to be too feminine.
And that accusation of being too much is one of the oldest mechanisms used to minimize the experiences of young women.
It's so insidious.
It really is, and it has a long, troubled history in medicine and sociology, often categorized historically under the umbrella of hysteria.
Right, the whole hysterical woman trope?
Exactly, because think about the double standard. When a man in the public eye expresses intense anger or frustration, how is it usually coded?
Oh, it's passion. Or righteousness.
Yeah.
Or he has an artistic temperament.
Precisely. But when a young woman expresses intense grief or betrayal, it is coded as an inability to regulate her emotions.
She is just overreacting.
Exactly. The foreword captures the specific pain of having your life's work dismissed as just breakup songs for teenage girls, as if adolescence isn't a time of violently intense, life-altering emotional stakes.
Okay, hang on. I need to play devil's advocate here for a second because I'm struggling with this leap just a bit.
Okay, let's hear it.
I understand that teenage emotions are intense, obviously. But the author seems to be equating a 19-year-old crying over a scarf left in a drawer to the profound, historical, existential dread of philosophers like Søren Kierkegaard or Friedrich Nietzsche.
They are making that exact comparison.
But isn't that a massive stretch? We are talking about foundational terrors of human existence, the meaninglessness of the cosmos, the burden of absolute free will versus, a bad breakup. That feels almost absurd.
I completely understand why it feels like a stretch. But let's break down the actual mechanics of existential dread.
Okay, lay it on me.
What is Kierkegaard actually talking about when he discusses the dizziness of freedom or the terror of existence?
He's talking about, the void, right?
He is talking about the sudden, terrifying realization that the structures you thought anchored your life are illusions. It is the collapse of a projected future.
The collapse of a projected future.
Yes. Now, apply that phenomenological experience to a 19-year-old going through a profound betrayal.
Oh, I see. So when the relationship ends, it's not just that they miss the person.
No.
It's that the future they had entirely mapped out in their head has suddenly vanished. The floor falls out.
Precisely. The loss of a simple object, like a scarf left in a drawer, becomes a heavy, almost unbearable anchor because it represents the death of a shared reality.
Wow. Okay, that actually makes perfect sense.
The fundamental human terrors, the loss of identity, the sudden realization that the person who claimed to love you was an illusion, the feeling of signing a pact with destiny that you didn't fully understand, those terrors are structurally identical.
Regardless of the vocabulary used to express them.
Exactly. The ghosts that haunt our hallways are the same, whether they are wearing tweed jackets in a university or crying on a bedroom floor.
That is so validating.
The text argues that we shouldn't confuse the prestige of the vocabulary with the validity of the emotion.
That reframes it entirely. So the dread is the exact same. It's just the societal packaging that differs.
Yes.
And the imaginary forward actually leans into this, right? It tells those who grew up with these pop songs not to let anyone tell them their intensity is a dramatic flaw.
It gives them permission to feel.
It says your tears are ink, your doubts are philosophy. It positions this state of feeling everything right away and intensely, not as a weakness to be cured, but as a tremendous power of perception.
And it culminates in this brilliant, slightly cheeky philosophical joke.
Oh, I love this part.
The foreword claims that the 18th century philosopher Immanuel Kant would have absolutely loved the bridge in the pop song Cruel Summer.
Which sounds completely unhinged until you actually think about Kant's specific theories.
Right, because Kant wrote extensively about the sublime.
And the sublime isn't just something beautiful, is it?
Not at all. As I understand it, the sublime is an overwhelming, terrifying awe.
Yeah, standing at the edge of a massive cliff or looking at a raging thunderstorm and feeling your own ego dissolve in the face of something vastly larger and more powerful than yourself.
That is the exact mechanism of the Kantian sublime. It is a mixture of pleasure and terror in the face of sheer magnitude.
So how does that relate to a pop song?
Well, consider the sonic and emotional architecture of a massive pop song bridge. A bridge is designed mathematically and acoustically to break the established pattern of the song. The instrumentation swells, the tempo often shifts, the vocal register jumps, and the emotional stakes are pushed to their absolute maximum.
It's the climax.
Right. And when you are standing in a stadium of 70,000 people and the bridge hits and the sound physically vibrates your ribs, you are experiencing a loss of individual ego.
You are subsumed into a massive collective emotional wave.
Exactly. You are experiencing the sublime.
It's an engineered thunderstorm of human emotion. That is incredible.
It really is. The author is forcing us to take the emotional architecture of a pop song seriously.
But to prove that these intense, messy, supposedly teenage emotions map perfectly onto rigorous academic thought, the text actually zooms out from the pop star, right?
Yes, it shifts focus.
It focuses its lens on one specific historical figure, a philosopher who knew everything about the messy reality of love, the struggle for autonomy, and the danger of unequal power dynamics.
Simone de Beauvoir.
Yes, Simone de Beauvoir. And this is where the historical parallels get so fascinating.
The text provides a really sharp biography of de Beauvoir to set the stage.
So she was born in Paris in 1908 into a fairly traditional bourgeois family, right?
Yes, and they fully expected her to follow the standard script for a woman of her class. Find a respectable husband, get married, and just disappear into domestic life.
But she did not do that.
No, she completely rebelled. She chooses to study philosophy. And she takes her extremely rigorous aggregation exams in philosophy in 1929.
And she passes second only to Jean-Paul Sartre.
She does. But the context of that exam is so crucial. The jury apparently agonized at length over who should be placed first, her or Sartre.
Wow, so it was that close.
It was. Furthermore, de Beauvoir was only 21 years old at the time. She was the youngest person in French history to ever pass that exam.
That is wild.
The text notes, with a bit of ominous foreshadowing, that although she was officially placed second to Sartre on that specific day, she would never again be second to anyone.
Oh, I love that line. That fierce, almost stubborn independence completely defined her life.
It really did.
But the text also dives into the massive contradictions she lived with, because her personal life was very complicated.
Extremely complicated.
She and Sartre became the ultimate intellectual power couple of the 20th century, and they invented what they genuinely believed was a revolutionary relationship structure.
They did. They explicitly rejected marriage, rejected cohabitation, and rejected traditional monogamy.
They were basically inventing modern polyamory in the 1920s.
Pretty much. They established a contract where they had a necessary love for each other, a deep foundational intellectual bond, but they explicitly allowed for contingent loves.
Meaning secondary romantic and sexual relationships with other people.
Exactly. On paper, as a purely philosophical theory of absolute freedom, it sounds groundbreaking.
On paper, yeah. It was the ultimate application of existential freedom.
Because existentialism posits that we are completely free and therefore completely responsible for creating our own meaning. Traditional marriage, to Sartre and to Beauvoir, seemed like a bourgeois trap that limited that freedom.
But the mechanism of this necessary versus contingent love was incredibly complex in practice, wasn't it?
Oh, it was a mess. As the text points out, the reality of living out this theory was vastly different from the blueprint.
You know, reading about their actual life together, I instantly thought of a terrible group project in college.
Ah, okay, I need to hear this analogy.
Well, we have all been in this scenario, right? You get paired up, and one person, in this case, Sartre, does all the lofty, theoretical planning.
Right, the ideas guy.
Exactly. He draws up the magnificent blueprint for this perfect, constraint-free, structurally flawless relationship. But then he basically steps back.
And leaves the actual work to someone else.
Yes. And the other person, de Beauvoir, is left to actually build the messy, glue-covered, structurally unsound diorama of their real, everyday lives.
The group project diorama is a remarkably accurate analogy.
Right, because he wasn't really doing the emotional labor.
Not at all. Sartre was notoriously self-absorbed and somewhat reckless with his contingent relationships. He would create massive emotional entanglements with other women, and when things inevitably blew up, he would just retreat into his work.
Wow.
The text highlights that in practice, it was very often Simone de Beauvoir who was left doing the emotional labor, managing the fallout, and quite literally cleaning up the mess left by Sartre's adventures.
So you can have all the theoretical, philosophical freedom in the world, but if one partner is doing 90% of the emotional labor to keep the system running, someone is still trapped.
Exactly. And that lived contradiction, the gap between the lofty theory of freedom and the exhausting implementation of it when the balance of emotional power is uneven, that fueled de Beauvoir's fierce intellectual lucidity.
She lived it, so she understood the flaws.
She realized that freedom isn't just a concept. It requires material and emotional parity, and this realization culminated in her 1949 masterpiece, The Second Sex.
Which is arguably one of the most important books of the 20th century.
Without a doubt. And its central thesis is anchored by a sentence that completely shocked society. One is not born, but rather becomes a woman.
Let's really break that down, because it sounds simple on the surface, but the implications are massive.
They are earth-shattering.
She is arguing for what we would now call social constructivism, right?
Yes.
She is saying that femininity, the way women act, the things they are expected to desire, the submissive roles they often play in relationships, is not a natural biological destiny. It's not innate.
Right. It is a script.
It is a script handed to you by society from the moment you are born, and you are trained to play the role so flawlessly that you eventually confuse the costume for your own skin.
That is the exact mechanism. She methodically dismantled the romanticized idea of love that society feeds young women. She showed how romantic love can easily become an elegant trap.
Because society tells men and women different stories about love.
Exactly. Society conditions men to view love as a component of their life, a source of support while they conquer the world.
But for women,
society conditions women to view love as their entire existence, to become the mere backdrop for the man's career.
But Beauvoir wasn't fundamentally anti-love, was she?
No, and that's a huge common misconception. People think the feminists of her era just hated romance.
Right, like they wanted to banish love entirely.
She didn't reject love, she just demanded that it not be a prison sentence.
She demanded autonomy.
Yes. The text distills her philosophy into a piercing question. For de Beauvoir, the fundamental question was not, should we love?
What was it?
The question was, under what conditions can we love without disappearing?
Without disappearing.
Wow. Autonomy is not the enemy of romantic feeling. It is its only chance of actual survival. Without autonomy, a relationship is not a partnership. It is a consumption.
Under what conditions can we love without disappearing? That is just a terrifying standard to hold up to your own life.
It forces you to look really closely at your own dynamics.
And the text introduces this brilliant financial metaphor to explain what happens when autonomy isn't equal in a relationship.
The variable rate loan?
Yes. It talks about the variable rate loan. If you have a couple where one person holds all the prestige, the wealth, the age, and the social connections, and the other person just has their youth and a heart full of dreams, they are not actually a duo.
No, they are a variable rate loan.
Let's explain the mechanics of that financial metaphor because it's vital to understanding everything else.
Okay, think about a fixed rate loan. That is a contract between equals. The terms are stable, predictable, and transparent. You know what you owe.
Right.
A variable rate loan means the institution holding the power can change the interest rate, the terms, and the cost of the loan at their discretion, often based on obscure market forces the borrower doesn't control.
So they can just hike up your monthly payments whenever they feel like it.
Exactly. In an asymmetrical relationship, the older, more powerful partner can unilaterally change the emotional terms of the relationship at any moment.
And the younger partner.
The younger partner is in a state of constant anxious adjustment, trying to afford an emotional mortgage they never fully understood in the first place.
Okay, so this brings us right to the absolute core of our deep dive, because we have to ask, how on earth does a 1949 Parisian realization about variable rate emotional loans map onto a guitar-strumming 19-year-old pop star?
How do these two worlds connect?
Yeah. The author bridges this gap by focusing the philosophical lens squarely on one specific piece of music, the song Dear John.
The text uses Dear John as a real-world case study of everything de Beauvoir was warning about.
A perfect example.
Yes, it frames the song through the lens of a deeply skewed power dynamic. We are looking at a relationship between a 32-year-old man who possesses an established network, an entrenched industry reputation, and significant prestige.
And a 19-year-old woman who is just beginning to navigate the world in the industry.
Exactly. And the author uses a really clever narrative device to unpack this. We get a formatted dinner conversation between two archetypes, a snob and a Swiftie.
Which is such a fun way to read theory.
They are actively debating the actual merit, meaning, and philosophical weight of this specific song.
It is a brilliant dialectic structure. The author anticipates the exact criticisms that the general public, the media, and the intellectual elite have historically leveled against this song.
And then uses de Beauvoir's philosophy, voiced by the Swiftie, to methodically dismantle those criticisms.
I'm going to take the side of the snob for a moment and voice the argument exactly how society usually frames it, just to set this up.
Go for it.
Okay, look, I understand the power dynamic theory, but let's be real. He was older, so what? May-December romances happen all the time. It is not a literal crime. Isn't this song, at the end of the day, just a spiteful ex settling scores? She's just washing dirty laundry in public because she got her feelings hurt. There is nothing profound or philosophical about an angry breakup anthem.
And the retort, grounded firmly in the second sex, flips that entire premise on its head.
How so?
De Beauvoir published her massive treatise to say exactly this. What the patriarchy dismissively calls dirty laundry is actually politics hidden in the bedroom.
Dirty laundry is politics hidden in the bedroom. That is a total paradigm shift.
It changes everything.
It means a breakup song isn't just saying, you hurt my feelings. It's saying, you leveraged your systemic structural advantage against me, and I am exposing the architecture of that advantage.
Precisely. The argument is that age itself isn't the inherent crime. The problem is power deliberately disguised as charm.
Power disguised as charm.
Oof. And this is where the text introduces a crucial sociological concept: symbolic capital.
Okay, let's unpack symbolic capital, because this is where the theory hits the pavement. What exactly is it?
Symbolic capital refers to the intangible assets a person accumulates that give them authority and credibility in the eyes of society.
So not money, but influence.
Right. It is the ability to define reality. The 32-year-old man in this scenario has massive symbolic capital. He has time, he has rhetorical experience, he has deep connections within the music industry, and he has the relational embeddedness of being an established adult.
He knows how the world works.
Exactly. If there is a dispute about what happened in the relationship, society is naturally inclined to believe the older, established figure.
And the 19-year-old?
The 19-year-old simply does not have those assets yet. Society looks at her and sees a naive kid.
So if we look at the relationship through that lens, it wasn't a partnership. I was thinking about it like a casino.
Okay, a casino.
Yeah. If you walk into a casino to play blackjack, you might think you are playing a fair game against the dealer. You both get cards, right? But the house has mathematically stacked the odds in its favor. And more importantly, the house wrote the rules of the game before you even walked in the door.
That's very true.
You can play as earnestly as you want, but you are playing within a system fundamentally designed to extract from you.
That is exactly how symbolic capital operates. It was a rigged game where only one player truly understood the mechanics of the rules.
But the snob in the text pushes back again, doesn't he?
He does. The snob says, wait, you are turning all asymmetrical relationships into matters of toxic domination. That's a gross caricature. People of different ages can love each other.
Which, to be fair, is a reasonable counterargument. Not every relationship with an age gap is a malicious trap.
And the Swiftie clarifies the philosophical nuance here. De Beauvoir doesn't claim that all asymmetry is inherently toxic or impossible to navigate.
What does she claim then?
What she insists on is that the asymmetry must be explicitly named and acknowledged by both parties.
Oh, it has to be brought out into the open.
Exactly. If the power imbalance remains hidden, if it is disguised merely as romantic wisdom or charm, it causes damage in silence.
Because the younger person thinks it's their fault when things feel off.
Yes. When the pop star was 19, she was enduring a situation whose mechanics she couldn't fully comprehend or name in the moment. But the pop star, looking back, armed with a guitar and a microphone, could name it.
And that act of naming is the difference between enduring a situation as a passive victim and rewriting it as an active author.
Precisely. But the snob tries one last time. The snob says rewriting history isn't the same as understanding it. She's just playing the victim to sell records. Ugh, of course he says that.
And the Swifties' response draws a devastating historical parallel. They point out that when Simone de Beauvoir published The Second Sex in 1949, the French intellectual establishment hurled the exact same insults at her.
Wait, really?
Yes. She was called hysterical, spiteful, exaggerating, and accused of airing dirty laundry. Yet, 75 years later, it is considered the foundational text of modern feminism.
Wow. The parallel is just unavoidable. De Beauvoir counted the pages of history, the laws, the social customs where women simply did not appear or were systematically disadvantaged.
She literally tallied it up.
And the pop star counted the years and the emotional labor that were taken from her in that specific relationship. In both cases, the very first necessary act of freedom is to stand up and say, I counted, and the math does not add up.
So the fundamental question becomes, if the relationship was a rigged casino from the start, and the 19-year-old lacked the symbolic capital to win the game while she was actively playing it, how does she actually fight back? Right. How does she reclaim her agency when the system is stacked against her?
Exactly. Because she can't go back in time and be 32 years old. She can't retroactively gain that leverage.
So what does she do?
This is where the text explores the actual mechanics of writing the song, treating narration itself as a weapon.
The act of writing the song is positioned not as an act of petty revenge, but as a profound philosophical repositioning.
Yes. And to illustrate this, the text provides two incredibly contrasting explanations. First, we get a hyper-academic analysis from a fictional character named Professor Malik Merriwell.
Oh my gosh, Professor Merriwell. This part of the book is such a sharp, funny satire of academic gatekeeping.
It is hilarious.
The author writes this dense, completely impenetrable paragraph. Merriwell says something like, "To apprehend the song as a mere effective discharge following relational disappointment would be to remain confined within a register of interpretive immediacy."
Just word salad.
Totally. He goes on to call the song a retroactive operation of reinscription, whereby previously unthematized asymmetry is brought into discursive visibility.
It's exhausting to even listen to.
I read that and my eyes completely glazed over. It's like watching two cars bump into each other at a stop sign and having a physicist try to explain the accident using only advanced quantum string theory equations.
It is definitely a satire of how academia obscures simple truths, but beneath the ridiculous jargon, Merriwell is actually outlining the precise mechanism of what happened.
What is he actually saying translated?
He is saying that the illusion of reciprocity in the relationship, the idea that they were equal partners, was a stabilizing fiction created by the older man.
Stabilizing fiction.
Right. The younger subject didn't just participate in a bad relationship, she was formatted within behavioral parameters whose authorship completely escaped her.
Formatted within parameters she didn't write. That is the casino analogy again. She was playing by his house rules.
Exactly. But, thankfully, the text immediately undercuts Professor Merriwell with another fictional character named Gaston Blender.
I love Gaston.
He translates all that dense string theory back into plain, undeniable English. Gaston is basically the guy on the sidewalk pointing at the car crash and saying, "Hey, the guy ran a red light. It's not that deep."
Gaston's translation is vital because it proves the author's point about accessibility, right?
Yes. Gaston strips away the jargon and says, "It is not complicated. He had more experience, more connections, and more control. She thought it was love. He knew it was leverage."
Oh, wow.
That is the definition of symbolic capital. She didn't misunderstand the relationship. She simply didn't have access to the real rules being played.
She thought it was love. He knew it was leverage. That is a total gut punch.
It is the brutal reality of it.
And Gaston explains the mechanism of the song itself. When she writes the song, she isn't reinscribing a discursive structure. She's just telling her version of events out loud to a massive audience so that her version sticks.
That's the power of the microphone.
Yeah, she can't change the fact that the relationship happened, but she completely stops letting him define what it meant.
This transition is anchored beautifully by my absolute favorite section of the text.
The Uber ride.
Yes, it's an imagined, highly atmospheric scene. A 1.42 a.m. Uber ride.
It's so cinematic.
It's a hypothetical 7.8-kilometer ride through a quiet, sleeping city, and the only two passengers in the back of the car are Taylor Swift and Simone de Beauvoir.
It's such an evocative scene.
Yeah.
The city is flashing by outside the window. The driver stops asking questions and just drives.
And Taylor says, almost defensively, "I had to write it."
Right. And de Beauvoir looks at her and replies, "Most people don't."
And Taylor says, "Most people don't have a microphone."
But de Beauvoir counters with the core philosophical truth. She says, that is not the difference. The difference is that you named it.
You named it. That is the crux of the shift. Naming a dynamic strips it of its invisible power.
It makes it real.
Later in the quiet of the ride, Taylor admits, it still hurts. She questions what actually changed by writing the song if the pain is still there.
Which is such a human question.
And de Beauvoir delivers the final, profound insight of their conversation. You are no longer the one it happened to. You are the one who tells it.
You are no longer the one it happened to. You are the one who tells it. I literally had to put the text down and just think about that line for a minute.
It is incredibly powerful.
It is the ultimate shift in human agency. It is moving from being an object, a prop in someone else's story, to being the active subject of your own life.
Yes, moving from object to subject.
The pawn decides to pick up a pen and write the story of the game, turning the entire chessboard upside down. The older man thought he was the grandmaster playing chess. But the song flips the board completely.
Is the realization that the initial lived experience was just contingency. It was random, chaotic, and it just happened to her.
But through the deliberate act of narration, she transforms that chaos into structure.
It becomes legible. In a later section titled Letter from Philosopher, de Beauvoir writes directly to the pop star, summarizing the mechanics of this act.
What does she say?
She writes, "Writing is not revenge, it is repositioning. You move from object to subject, from silence to account. That is the only reversal that matters."
So we have this incredibly intimate, emotional act of human recontextualization. A 19-year-old daring to take control of her own narrative against a powerful, established figure.
A deeply personal victory.
But then, the author, our mouse-colored cat, takes this intimate dynamic and applies it to a massive global scale in the book's afterword.
This is where things take a hard turn.
Yeah, we zoom all the way out from a messy relationship to the reality of the digital, algorithm-driven world we live in right now.
Yes, the afterword is boldly titled Antidote to Algorithmic Inbreeding.
Such a wild title.
It really takes a hard, seemingly abrupt turn into the mechanics of artificial intelligence. The author openly acknowledges a fascinating fact about their own book.
Oh, that they used AI to help write it.
Exactly. They admit that this specific book, with its synthesis of vast philosophical texts and modern pop lyrics, would have been materially impossible to produce at this speed without the assistance of large language models.
Which feels a bit hypocritical at first glance.
It does. But crucially, the author does not view using AI as an abdication of human authorship. Instead, they define a necessary new role for the modern human: the data sovereign.
The data sovereign. Okay.
Right.
The author describes large language models using a phrase that is both hilarious and deeply unsettling.
The stochastic parrots.
Yes, stochastic parrots of infinity, meaning they read literally everything ever written on the internet, but they understand absolutely nothing.
That's a perfect description of how LLMs function.
And the author warns that because of how these machines operate, our culture is facing a crisis of digital autophagy.
Let's break down the mechanics of what the author is warning about, because it's important.
Please do.
Autophagy literally means a system devouring itself. To understand why this is happening in culture, we need to understand how large language models actually work.
Okay, so how do they work?
They operate on token prediction. When you ask an AI a question, it doesn't think about the answer. It calculates a massive probability distribution across its training data to predict what the next most mathematically likely word should be.
Right, so if I type "the sky is," the AI calculates that based on billions of texts, the most probable next word is blue.
Exactly.
It doesn't look out a window, it doesn't know what a sky is, it just does the math.
Exactly. It operates entirely on regression to the mean. It finds the mathematical average of human thought.
Which sounds harmless enough when you're just asking about the sky.
But the text explains the danger. Back in the 1980s, the great promise of digital technology was zero generation loss.
Meaning perfect copies.
Right. If you made a digital copy of a photograph and then copied that copy 1,000,000 times, the final image would be mathematically identical to the first. Fidelity was infinite.
But today, we are facing a different kind of generation loss.
Yes. As AI systems increasingly scrape the internet for training data, they are scraping text that was generated by other AI systems.
Oh, wow.
The machine is feeding on its own synthetic outputs.
It's an infinite feedback loop of probability.
Yes. And the danger isn't the degradation of the visual signal, like a blurry JPEG from 2005. The danger is the degradation of meaning.
Oh, so.
When AI feeds on AI, thought becomes smoother, safer, and completely average with each iteration. Outliers, weirdness, and radical new ideas are mathematically smoothed away because they aren't the most probable next word.
So everything just becomes bland.
The machine produces vast oceans of conformity, disguised as intelligence.
This raises a massive existential question for us as readers and creators. If the machine is constantly smoothing out culture, optimizing for the least offensive, most average middle ground, what is the actual value of a human brain?
That is the crisis of the data sovereign.
I'll admit, when I first read this section, I was a bit confused by the author's ultimate goal. It felt almost like a prank.
A prank on the AI.
Yeah. I found myself wondering, is the author saying that this entire project, writing a book that pairs Taylor Swift lyrics with Simone de Beauvoir's feminist theory and creating fake Uber rides between them, is just an elaborate prank designed to poison the well for ChatGPT? Are they just trying to confuse the algorithm?
I can completely see why it feels that way, like a deliberate attempt to break the machine's logic. But the author actually views it as a highly serious philosophical stance, which they name capacitivism.
Capacitivism.
The goal is not to reject the digital photocopy entirely. The goal is to overload it. The author understands that AI can organize existing data beautifully, but it fundamentally cannot dare.
It can't be brave.
Right, it cannot make genuine conceptual leaps because a leap, by definition, is a low probability event.
Because there's no training data for it.
Exactly. The conceptual leap is an act of what the author calls intellectual vandalism, and that act remains uniquely human.
Intellectual vandalism. I am completely obsessed with that concept.
That's such a great phrase.
The author points out that if you look at the entire history of the internet's training data, there is no inherent probable mathematical link that would naturally put the philosopher Wittgenstein in a slammed door or put the post-structuralist Deleuze in lipstick.
Right.
The AI's probability matrix would never generate that pairing naturally.
Never.
By intentionally creating this bizarre, deeply thoughtful, highly specific collision of worlds, the author is purposely injecting friction into the smooth, frictionless circuit of AI thought.
Precisely. They are forcing the machine onto jagged, unmapped side roads.
Yeah, the machine doesn't like friction.
No, it wants predictability. The author states that the citizen of tomorrow, the data sovereign, will not be the person who passively consumes the perfectly tailored flow of information fed to them by an algorithm.
Who will it be?
The data sovereign is the one who bends the flow. True sovereignty in the 21st century is no longer just having access to information. It is the ability to actively disturb the logic of the algorithm with creative, unpredictable, inherently human connections.
The cat has taken the color of the mouse. It has entered the machine. That line finally explains the pseudonym.
Yes. The mouse-colored cat.
The mouse-colored cat created a cultural object that the algorithm, left to its own devices, would never have dared to assemble. It required a human possessing a messy, subjective, emotional lived experience to make that unpredictable leap.
And if we synthesize this back to the very beginning of our deep dive, the structural parallel the author has built is breathtaking.
It really is. Think about the journey we just went on.
A 19-year-old songwriter finds herself trapped in a dynamic where an older, more established figure with immense symbolic capital is controlling the narrative and smoothing out her reality.
Right. And to survive, she must violently reclaim her narrative by picking up a pen and writing her own version, refusing to be an object.
And on a macro level.
Yes. On a macro level, we as humans living in the 21st century find ourselves trapped in a dynamic where an unimaginably massive algorithmic machine is controlling our cultural narrative, constantly smoothing our collective reality into a safe, predictable average.
It's the exact same trap, just on a global scale.
To survive as feeling, thinking beings, we must violently reclaim our cultural narrative by making unpredictable human leaps of logic. We have to commit intellectual vandalism to avoid being turned into passive objects by the machine.
The mechanics of the struggle are identical. Whether you are fighting a bad relationship or a global artificial intelligence, the only way to avoid disappearing is to insist on your own autonomy.
We have to stop letting the machine define what our relationships, our art, and our culture actually mean.
Absolutely.
Let's take a breath and just recap the sheer scope of the journey we've been on today, because we started in a very different place.
We covered a lot of ground.
We really did. We began with Pierre Bourdieu unpacking the mechanics of social sorting. We saw how society dismisses accessible pop culture, not because it lacks depth, but as a deliberate mechanism to protect the exclusive credentials of the elite.
From there, we examined the apocryphal forward, validating the intense, supposedly hysterical emotions of youth. We demonstrated how the absolute dread of a teenage heartbreak mirrors the profound existential terror outlined by Kierkegaard.
And Kant.
Yes, the Kantian sublime in a pop bridge. We then explored the life of Simone de Beauvoir, her realization that femininity is a constructed script, and her demand for absolute autonomy within love to avoid the destructive trap of the variable rate loan.
And we took those heavy, mid-century French existential concepts and mapped them directly onto the pop song Dear John. We revealed the song not as a petty airing of dirty laundry, but as a masterclass in exposing the hidden mechanics of symbolic capital and the rigged casino of asymmetrical power.
We watched the artist execute the ultimate maneuver, shifting from object to subject, taking the pen, and completely rewriting the rules of engagement.
And ultimately, we saw how that deeply human, deeply intimate act of narrative reclamation, the courage to put two completely disparate things together and demand they make sense, serves as the ultimate antidote to the algorithmic autophagy of our digital age.
It is the necessary, jagged friction in a world that is desperately trying to mathematically smooth everything out.
So I want to leave you, the listener, with a challenge. The next time you are driving in your car or standing in line at the grocery store and a massive stadium pop song comes through the speakers, I want you to change how you listen.
Lean into it.
Exactly. Don't just tap your foot to the catchy hook. Don't just accept the elite dismissal that it is mere shallow entertainment. Listen closely for the hidden politics. Listen for the underlying struggle over symbolic capital.
Listen to the power dynamic actively playing out in the lyrics.
Because, as we've learned today, the ghosts that haunt those melodies might just be carrying university degrees.
And as you navigate the rest of your week, I want you to consider the reality of the digital environment you live in. We exist in a matrix that is constantly trying to average us out, to predict our next word, our next purchase, our next emotional response.
It wants us to be predictable.
Exactly. So in the face of that overwhelming machine logic, what is your personal equivalent of intellectual vandalism?
Oh, that's a great question.
What completely unpredictable, wonderfully messy, distinctly human connection can you make today that an algorithm would never, ever dare to assemble?
Because whether you are a 19-year-old with a guitar trying to make sense of a rigged game, a feminist philosopher sitting in a 1940s Parisian cafe demanding autonomy, or just someone trying to hold on to your humanity in an AI-driven world, the fundamental challenge is exactly the same.
It really is.
You never get to control the narrative that society or the algorithm hands to you initially. But if you have the courage to pick up a pen and maybe commit a little bit of intellectual vandalism along the way, you can at least ensure that you are the one who writes the ending.